just a bit of context for the construction of this, because we often talk about the construction of it, but just to talk about it. So while they were working in the prairies, the people who were laying tracks, they would set about 5 miles of track every day. So that is quite a lot of work, very hard labor out here, a lot of immigrant labor as well, as we mentioned. Of course, there's quite a lot of Chinese history. We get a few Chinese names in the area. I may have mentioned that one of the oldest Chinatowns in Alberta was at Bankhead, everyone. Um, and there you go. There's a beautiful view of Mount Norquay there. Just over the other side of this hill, by the way, everyone, is another landmark here in Banff, a bit more modern in terms of our history here. But that is the Fenlands, which is, of course, our local recreation center. And I grew up playing quite a lot of hockey there. But just look at that magnificent postcard view in front of us. Really, the mountains are getting up and kicking, and I'm excited to go do some skiing quite soon. Now, just coming back to our conversations, as I was mentioning, yeah, Bankhead had one of the oldest Chinatowns in Alberta, actually, with quite a substantial Chinese population. And actually, up on Tunnel Mountain, interestingly, out by some of the hotels there, they actually have moved the Bankhead train station up there, and you were able to take a look at it. And on that plaque for the train station, there's actually a sort of a written letter talking about a Chinese boy and a Canadian boy who were exchanging different gifts from their cultures. A French Canadian boy and a Chinese boy exchanging gifts from their cultures for Christmas, which is pretty interesting because we are coming up, as Anthony just mentioned, to our holiday season. But a lot of labor, coming back to our main point, that was put in onto this area. And see here, everyone, we're not going to be able to pass past this sign. We're going to have to loop back around, which is fine to us, because of course we can't trespass onto the property. But here in the mountains, as I mentioned, 5 miles of track a day in the prairies. When they got to the mountains, they were lucky if they did about 500 feet. So the mountains caused quite a lot of turmoil for the original plans of construction in the area. There's a view of sulfur as well curving around here. So just coming back, of course, that is a lot of work to be doing in the area, but the fact that it did get laid is what opens up Banff and the history around it. Now here, when this was originally constructed, there were a few structures alongside this one. On the other side of the tracks, which no longer exists today, was one of the first ice houses at one of these smaller remote stations. So there was a refrigeration center here that was kept with ice built on the other side of the tracks. No, it is the opposite, Anthony. It is evening time. It is currently 5:41 p.m. here. But it does sort of look like dawn. Although typically here in our wintertime at 5:41 a.m., Anthony, it would be much, much darker because this morning wasn't really starting to get bright until I was at school at about 8:20. Now, I realized it was a bit of a cloudier day, but very dark in the mornings here during the year. So here is the actual front of the train station. But there was an ice house, this section here, that was constructed. Just another quick interesting thing to mention, everyone. On the other side of the road there, on our left-hand side, those are Russian willows, everyone. Very interesting tree to see planted here. Of course, one that does do quite well in our climate. But these were originally planted in the 1920s to provide shade for dignitaries and royals. So this has a little bit of that sort of history to it as well, sort of being a regal establishment as well as, of course, the Banff Springs is. But look at some of these sky views. Now, as I mentioned, this is a very interesting place to have a train station, and this wasn't the first one. The first station was actually constructed a bit further down, about 1.5 kilometers east from here along the line. But by 1888, it was deemed sort of not usable anymore. Of course, it was still usable, but had gotten into quite bad repair. And by 1888, 1890, things are starting to heat up. And before you know it, the 1900s come around, and Banff has a boom. Banff starts to wake up to more and more tourism. Just give some views of the roads around here as well before we'll back out and give a full view, of course, of the train station here. But in 1888, of course, it is sort of deemed not really acceptable, but they continued to use it for quite a long time. And when people would start to arrive, of course, the first people that would arrive were mostly explorers and people who came to settle the region. It wasn't really that royalty, that really wealthy tourist market yet. That starts to heat up in the 1900s, the late 1800s. And then from there, this one is constructed in, as I mentioned, 1910, which was deemed more suitable to accept the kind of people that Banff wanted to see, that Banff wanted to associate with. But the original one was actually about a kilometer and a half east from here, so even further away from town. But at that point in time, of course, in that 1910 mark, around that area, um, you around that timeline, you start to have a bit more opening up of other attractions in the area, not just Banff. So you start to see also the opening of Lake Louise and popularity of that region to grow. And then here in Banff, another development that is quite large, that is, of course, very important to a lot of the history that I like to talk about on my tours, everyone, which if you've been on a few times, you will, of course, know, is the Cave and Basin. And so as the Banff Springs Hotel, named for, of course, the Banff Springs, the hot springs, starts to kick up in 1888. As I mentioned, the pool for the Cave and Basin is built in 1915, and the peak of that tourism for the Cave and Basin is in about the 1930s. So by the 1930s, you really see a full boom, everyone. Banff is open, Lake Louise is open, and really the areas around it are starting to become more populated and more explored. And so this train station ended up always staying as this beautiful little cookie cutter. I've seen some people describe it as an arts and crafts train station. Um, but look at that. It's an absolutely beautiful building. Look at that sky in the background, too. And then the Canadian flag, not blowing too hard, not too much wind at the moment. Um, but how's that for our landmark of the day, everyone? So we'll sort of curve back around to where we first started. Now, if we were to follow any of these roads out in this direction, to the left of us at the minute, either of these two, you would end up more in the heart of the town of Banff. In front of me here is the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Dispatch for town. And then off to the side is another building used for bus tours and for the train station. Um, and as you can see, really here, moving into this winter season, these sort of buildings that have been built, that have been here for quite a long time. So some of these really notable structures are, for example, the train station right here, the Parks Administration building on the other side of town, alongside, of course, some of the early churches in the area. These are really buildings that have stood the test of time quite phenomenally. Because here, our current infrastructure is built up very clearly to support these really cold climates. It's part of the reason that, as we like to mention, these heat waves that have been coming through summer after summer are making it very difficult for a lot of people who live inside. But in that case, these buildings that have been around for a very long time have really stood the test of time. And so, as I was saying, when we were over in Europe not too long ago in Ireland, you, of course, see a lot of medieval ruins. You see those old rock castles and structures. And here you don't see that. And that's because a lot of the original buildings that were constructed, a lot of the First Nations buildings that were built here, of course, were often built of animal hide and of sticks and wood and logs and trees. So, sometimes they won't always hold up like some of the other ones. Of course, that makes much more sense than a rock castle here. And then, of course, through colonialism, there was some destruction, or a lot of destruction of course, some of those original buildings. So you don't quite see that here, but to see these buildings that are just over 100 years old in Banff here like this, really, since the beginning of the big town settlement here, is quite a magnificent thing to see. I'm not going to get too close here, everyone. We have some deer here. These are mule deer. You see two young bucks there with their antlers. I'll zoom in on them there. And they are just picking through the grass. It's just through the snow there to get some grass. Of course, their jobs they start working quite a bit harder at their job of getting food during the winter time, but there is enough to go around. And you'll notice that hide getting a little bit thicker, getting a bit more prepared for the winter season. So, of course, you do want to leave over 2 meters of space there for them. So, zoom back out, show you where so a white-tailed deer's tail actually isn't white on the outside, it's brown, it's white on the inside. And mule deers will often have a white tail just like this, but it doesn't flip up the same way that the white tails do. They don't run away like that. Exactly, Ruth. The climate is going down quite rapidly here because just the other night on Halloween, of course, happy Halloween to those of you that I haven't. But of course, I haven't talked to any of you since Halloween or over the time of Halloween. There, I know there were some tours that you may have enjoyed seeing during Halloween time. There's a lot of guides that do that sort of thing. But happy Halloween.